and see how it goes. So we've been in business almost a year now. We're coming up on 1 year. And so far so good. So he's running the shop today, so I could come over and talk to you a little bit about getting into the hobby. So first off, I wanted to hand out everybody one of these flyers. It's from the American Homebrew Association. It's a very simplified breakdown of the brewing process. We like to tell everybody, if you can boil water, you can make beer. And that's honest to goodness truth. Would you like one, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. It's the honest to goodness truth. So I'm really going to show you how easy it is, give you a little bit of history on brewing beer, and just answer some questions for you. I may jump around a little bit. That's just because of how my mind works. If I do something and you're like, wait, just go back to that, I didn't understand, just speak up, let me know. This is very, very informal. A lot of people ask, one of the first questions is it legal? And the answer to that is yes. The long story of it is 1920s when we had Prohibition, till 1933 it was completely illegal to make any type of alcohol. With the 21st Amendment being ratified in 1933, you could produce alcohol. However, just like our government wants, they want money. That's what the whole thing was about, was money. Just remember, Al Capone didn't go to prison for murder, he went to prison for tax evasion. So, 1933, it did become legal to produce beer in your house. However, you had to file taxes on it, you had to pay taxes on it, and it had to be consumed in your home. Jimmy Carter, 1978, actually made it legal for somebody to produce alcohol in their home and not pay taxes on it. So thank goodness for Carter. Illinois then adopted that in 1978, and we've been able to produce a beer ever since. Federally, it's been legal since 1933, but every state has the ability to put restrictions on it, and even municipalities can put restrictions on it. Nothing around here that's going to cause us any problems, though. State of Illinois says you can produce up to 100 gallons of beer tax-free in your home for every person over the age of 21. If there's more than one person over 21, you can produce up to a maximum of 200 gallons of beer in your home before you would then have to start reporting and paying taxes on it.
That's just making it, not even selling it or anything.
That's not, no. You cannot sell it. Straight off the beat, you cannot sell anything that you make.
Consider the evidence.
Yeah, you can give it away. Yeah, and my thought on the whole 200-gallon thing is prove I made over 200 gallons. Right. You know, but again, those are the Illinois laws. So yes, completely legal to do. You just cannot sell it. All right. So the four things that go into beer is water, grain, hops, and yeast. Those are the four things that you need. That is actually the German purity law. You have to have those four things to make a beer. It was changed, gosh, I'm trying to remember when, but it was changed to include rice in making beer. Most of your mass-produced lagers from Budweiser, Miller, Coors, all those places, 80% of their grain bill is rice. Anheuser-Busch is the #1 consumer of rice within the United States. So, yeah, that was the fifth thing that was in addition to the German purity law to allow in the brewing process. So, I brought just some samples of all those things with me. These are all barley, different styles of barley. The first one that you see here is just two-row. It's American two-row grain. They basically call it two-row because when it grows, there's two little flakes on it. All right, so it's a two-row grain. They also make a 6-row grain, and as you can imagine, there would be 6 little stalks coming off of it. So 2-row grain is the most common grain in the brewing process. When during the process of malting it, they will also sometimes roast some of those grains as well. When they roast them, they then produce a color and different flavors. Those are usually given a number. So if you notice, Crystal 20 is a little bit darker than our regular, and then it starts to get darker, darker, and darker, and darker. These 6 grains here are the exact same grain. They've just been roasted to different degrees. So you guys are more than welcome to try a little if you want. I promise it will not hurt you. I'll do it ahead of time. If you want, if you don't, completely up to you. But if you taste it, you're essentially just eating a little bit of barley. You're gonna taste the you're gonna taste grain. It's the basis for every single beer. We also have some darker roasted barleys. They'll produce more of a chocolatey flavor. Yeah, this one will produce a little more of a chocolatey flavor, and you're more than welcome to taste that one as well if you'd like. And then we have our some of our import grains: German Pilsner grain, Munich grain, honey malt. This one will have like a little honey flavor. We even have some smoked grains. This is cherry smoked. Pass this guy around too. Just the smell of them is awesome. So there are so many grains that could possibly be used in the beer making process. I'll come back and get it from you. You don't have to get up. There's so many different grains that can be used in the beer making process that the possibility of that is completely endless. And that's what makes every beer so unique, is the combination of different grains at different times, at different temperatures, will truly make every beer different. So once we have our grain figured out, remember how they included rice in the beer making process? Well, we also have some flaked rice here, and that is there. But in addition to flaked rice, I don't know if I'd eat it, but you can. Excuse me. In addition to flaked rice, there's also different adjuncts that come on too. Corn is used, flaked wheat, flaked oats, rye as well in the beer making process. This gets into overwhelming for the home brewer when you talk about all these different grains, temperatures to add them, when to add them. It can be very overwhelming. So in the most recent years, actually for about the past 20 years I would assume, they tried to make home brewing simplified so people could get into it easily. What the companies have done is they've extracted all the proteins and sugars out of these grains. They've done all the hard work for you, and they've turned it into an extract powder. This is essentially different combinations of grains mixed together, made into a wort, and then flash dried. They dry it so they can package it and store it easier. This is essentially dry grain right here. Comes in packages of plain light, plain amber, plain dark. These are these companies' proprietary recipes with using a combination of these grains to get a particular flavor out of it. I'll pass that around for you. You guys are more than welcome to open that up. That dry extract is very absorbent to any type of moisture. If you wanted to take a little bit and put it on your tongue, you're more than welcome to. It will get sticky, very, very sticky. So not only is there dry extract, there's also liquid extracts as well. Process was done the exact same. They've just extracted all the sugars out of these grains and they've made them into a liquid syrup, a syrup that you can use to make beer. I don't have any of these opened up, so I'm not going to pass those around, but the idea is the exact same. So we have our grains or extracts. We talked about our adjuncts a little bit. We need hops. There are hundreds and hundreds of different varieties of hops. The possibilities are endless. Every year there's new varieties coming out from different growers. They're classified as experimental for a few years, then somebody gives them a name, and then they go into the commercial market. Some very popular ones, Citra and Cascade. If you've had any type of IPA type beer, a really hoppy beer, I'm almost guaranteeing you've had these hops in your beer. They're the go-tos for most of them. I'm going to pass these around. You can smell them. They've been in this jar for a while, so the odors are going to be a little off, but they're still pretty pungent. You're going to know what you're smelling. Please do not try to eat any of this or put it on your tongue. Seriously, the acids inside these hops are so strong that you'll literally lose your taste buds for 4 or 5 days. I mean, honestly, speaking from experience. So,
Who double dog dare you?
well, it was actually see, here's where I get into these off stories. One of the new things, the new products that has come out, because breweries are always looking to save money, they've come out with liquid hops now. Basically, they've taken the hops and they've compacted them and extracted just the oils out of the hop itself. That cuts down on packaging considerably. So they're able to send what would normally be 2-3 pounds of hops into this concentrated oil that's just in the size of a syringe. Breweries love them because they can order all kinds of hops in a liquid. They can dose it accurately and it's easy to store. Well, we got some in at our shop, and I started taking the syringes out of the packages, and that's what they come in, little syringes. And they were sticky because one of the syringes had leaked a little bit and it had some hop oil on it. Well, I had some hop oil on my thumb, washed my hands, still I felt like a little stickiness to it. I'm like, huh. So me being me, let's see what it tastes like. I licked my thumb. I literally did not get my taste buds back for 2 days. It was that strong. So please don't. If you get into home brewing, please don't. Another thing is specifically with hops, if you have dogs or cats, keep them away from dogs or cats. They can cause malignant hypothermia. Basically, the core temperature of the animal starts to increase, and they cannot get their temperature down. They don't have the ability to regulate their temperature as well. So they'll end up cooking. They get so hot that they'll end up dying. So please keep hops away from any types of animals. If you grow hops at home, put some sort of caging or something like that around them. I'm a dog lover, so that's kind of like my pet peeve, literally get it. Anyway, keep hops away from cats or dogs. This is this is a newer hop that was experimental 2 years ago. It came out to the commercial market this year. It's called Lemon Drop. I've made a beer with it. I thought it tasted all right. It wasn't exactly the lemon flavor that I was hoping to get out of it. But even smelling it, you can smell a little lemony to it. And that's what that's why so many beers taste so different. It's just there's such a variety out there. So hops, when they're added to beer, they're added during the boiling process. Depending on when you add that hop to the boiling process, depends on what type of flavor you're going to get out of it. What I mean by that is, if you add the hop at the very beginning of the boil, you're going to extract all the acids out of that hop, and you're going to get a bitter beer. All right, so your IPAs that have a really strong bitterness to them, they add a lot of hops right at the beginning of the boil. If you're wanting a beer with a lot of flavor or aroma, you're going to add your hops at the end of the boil, because then you extract more of the flavoring component and not as much of the acids. So again, there's so many variations. I can give you the same ingredients to all of you, and you will all produce a different type of beer, if I didn't give you instructions. So even if I did give you instructions, half of you are going to produce a different type of beer. But that's why there's so many varieties of it. So hops, yeast. I did not bring any yeast with me, and I'm very sorry for that. However, I did bring 2 beers that we're currently fermenting at our shop. This is a wheat beer on the right, and this one is just about done. This is using American two-row, which is the grain on the far right. And then we also used, I'm trying to remember, it was a crystal malt as well. But we produced this little darker color. If you notice, yeah, you can see it. I'll pass this around so you can see them. But I just packaged this up, or I just put this in this flask a couple hours ago. But you'll already start to see the yeast settling on the bottom. It's coming out of suspension, and you'll see little white yeast on the bottom. I'll pass that around.
I'm sure you tell me not to drink this.
Yeah, that is just all the yeast that's been in that beer, that's been fermenting. Once I took them out of their temperature-controlled environment, they've all started to settle on the bottom. So you will see like a little white cake. It's very, very thin on that guy, but that is live active yeast in that beer. That's dropped down or settled down. This guy is a wheat beer, and he is only been fermenting for about 24 hours now. So you won't see much of a yeast cake on him because he's still actively fermenting. But if you look at the beer along the side walls, you'll see these little CO2 bubbles coming up, or these little bubbles. That's showing active fermentation. That is the yeast cells producing alcohol and CO2.
Okay, so when the yeast is done, then that's when it drops down, is what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Or when they've replicated enough or duplicated enough that they get heavy enough, they'll fall to the bottom. Yeah. But you'll see some little yeast cells in there, and I mean, you won't physically see the yeast cells unless you have a microscope, but you can see the caking or that powder that's on the bottom. Yes, sir.
Before you run off on that.
Yeah.
I was thinking, and I don't brew anything at home, I just drink
Sure. Yeah.
copious amounts of everything.
You sure? Sure.
It helps you cope.
Yeah,
Copious
this
amounts.
guy is my coping meal.
Right.
Yeah.
Self-medication.
Yeah.
I read somewhere, and I don't remember, it's been some years ago, that I believe it was Wales and maybe Ireland, that they decant live beer where it's still in the process, but I mean, like when they tap it, it's like 24 hours it's good or something like that, 36, and then it's done.
So there are
I didn't know whether that's true or not. I mean,
there are many yeast strains out there, thousands and thousands of yeast strains. I honestly have no idea how many. There are some yeast strains that can ferment high alcohol in a short amount of time. They don't produce as good a flavor. Most of those yeast strains are particularly used in the distilling process. They're able to they're able to live in a high alcohol environment because you're wanting to produce so much alcohol, and they also can do it as quick as possible. There's some yeast that will take regular wort and make it up to a 14% alcohol by volume in less than 48 hours. I mean, they can really cook and make some alcohol. We're not using that type of yeast in the beer making process. Most of the beer making yeast, their maximum tolerance is about 10%. Yeah, and that's just alcohol kills yeast. I mean, that's the weird thing about it. They produce alcohol in their environment, and then they end up dying from it. So, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But anyway,
don't be a yeast.
don't be a yeast. Don't be a yeast. You won't live too long. So, anyway, so we've kind of gone over a little bit of the components involved in, or the ingredients involved in making a beer. If you have those four things, water, yeast, hops, and a grain, you will make a beer. It will ferment. You will produce alcohol. So I'm going to focus on primarily the steps in getting involved and making it easy for you guys to make this beer. So I'm going to focus on our liquid extract and our dry extract for these examples. So if you come to our shop and you say, Slim, I want to learn how to make beer, can you set me up? I'm going to say absolutely. I would recommend that you get this kit. This kit comes with almost everything you see on the table. I've put a couple things that aren't included, but this kit's going to come with everything that you're going to need to produce your first 5-gallon batch of beer by making it in extract format. You will also need to purchase your ingredients in addition to this. So I'm sorry, this comes with all the equipment. You also need the ingredients. The kit we sell for $140. Ingredients kits range in about $40. So you can literally make your first batch of beer for under $200. A 5-gallon batch of beer is going to give you 53 12-ounce bottles, or a little over 2 cases. We will need to start our beer making process by heating up some hot water in our little kettle. Here, let me come around so I don't. Every recipe is different, so the water volumes are going to be different depending on what you're making, but you are going to have to heat up some water in this kettle. This can all be done on your stove, so you don't have to have a big burner outside. As long as your wife lets you and you clean up your mess, that you can make this in your kitchen, or her kitchen. You're going to put some hot water in here. You're going to heat this up. You are going to add your extracts. Now remember, the extracts are just grains that have already been milled, all the sugars extracted and made into this very fine convenient powder for you, or this little liquid for you. So you're going to add these extracts into your hot water, and you're going to stir it up a little bit. You're going to let it cook about a good five minutes or so. Once it's all dissolved and gone into this this liquid, it's going to turn into something, or it's gone into the water, it's going to turn into a dark liquid. Very similar to the flask that you see up here on the table. The instructions are then going to be to start a boil. The reason you start a boil is it sterilizes everything. You don't want any strange bacteria or strange yeast. There's yeast everywhere in here. That's why some beers you can only get in certain places, because the yeast that's in the environment. A lot of Belgian lambics are open fermentation.
Okay, so you
Yes.
have hot water,
Mhm.
and then you put your extracts in, but you don't want it boiling at that point, you just want it to be
You
hot.
just want it to be warm, yeah,
Okay.
hot. You just want it to be hot.
Okay,
Once your extracts are in here and they've dissolved completely, that's when you're going to start your
Okay.
boiling process. Now, almost every beer is boiled for 60 minutes. The reason we boil for 60 minutes, it releases something called DMS. DMS is a compound that's actually in the water that gives us an off flavor. When you're boiling it, it releases that DMS. So you're going to boil for about 60 minutes. You don't want your lid on this pot either. The reason is if you're boiling off all that DMS and your lid is on here, it sits on that lid and just drops right back in there. So you're not going to have the lid on. Another thing to take into account is when this is boiling, it's going to bubble a lot. It's sugar water is what it is. So it's going to be really, really foamy. You may have to turn the heat down a few times so you don't get a boil over. So once you start your boil, that's when you're going to add your bittering hops. These are the hops that you want to add to the beer that's going to give it that bitterness flavor that you taste in the beer. IPAs, you're going to add a lot right here at the 60-minute mark. Your lighter beers, not so much. Depending on the recipe and the beer you're wanting to make, it's going to tell you, or we're going to tell you, when to add what hop and what amount. So it's going to boil for 60 minutes, and during that time frame you're going to add hops along the way, whatever they may be. After 60 minutes, we want to cool this beer down now. There's different ways of doing it. You've probably seen something called like a worm or a wort chiller. It's just a copper or stainless steel coil that they put in here and run cold water through. That's one way of doing it. The simplest way for home brewers, you take the pot off the stove, go over to the sink, put it in the sink, put a bag of ice around it. Okay? At this point, you want to put a lid on this. Because you've boiled, you've sanitized everything now. You don't want anything odd, strange, whatever's floating around to get into this. This is sanitized beer. So you'll put your lid on to prevent anything from getting in there, and you will cool this down rapidly. While this is cooling, most people will do a little bit of cleaning as well, because you have to ferment your beer now. You have to put it in some sort of vessel that the yeast can then consume the alcohol, or consume the sugars and produce alcohol. So most people will do a primary fermentation in what's called a brew bucket. This brew bucket is a little over 7 gallons, and it's got a hole in our lid here. This hole is used to put an airlock like this guy right here. So what that does is it prevents anything from our environment getting into our beer. All right? But as the yeast consumes sugar and produces CO2, it allows that to escape. All right? So while this is cooling down, you're going to take your brew bucket, and this has to be sanitary as well. This has to be sanitized. You don't want anything odd critter that's on the lid or in the bucket to get into your beer. So there's different options out there for sanitization. Hot water is one. as long as it's above, what, like 160, I think is pasteurization. As long as it's above 160, it'll kill anything. I don't like messing around with 160-degree water because it'll also burn you. So there is, we do not recommend bleach, although it can be used. We don't recommend it. We do have an acid-based sanitizer. It's called Star San. I thought I brought it, but this isn't it. I'll get to this in a second. What this acid-based sanitizer is, it decreases the pH of the water to a point nothing can live on it. All right? Most people will mix this up. They'll put it in a little squirt bottle. Everything they're going to touch with it or that they need to be sanitized, they'll squirt it on there. Another good one, and what most breweries use, is an iodine-based sanitizer. Nothing lives through iodine. So they will mix up an iodine-based sanitizer with some water, and everything that they want to sanitize, they dunk, spray, put in this iodine mixture. The problem with iodine is it will stain you. It'll stain your clothes, it'll stain your hands, it'll stain your equipment, it'll stain your wife's counter. So not too many home brewers use iodine, although it is, you can use it. It's probably the best choice. Next best would be the Star San, which is the acid. Either one will work, but you need to sanitize your bucket now. So after your bucket is sanitized and your wort has cooled down.
What temperature do you want to cool that to?
So most yeast like to be pitched around the 80-degree mark. This probably needs to be down to under 100.
Okay.
All right, and if you'll notice, you cannot boil 5 gallons in this pot. This pot is not 5 gallons, but you're making a 5-gallon beer. So there comes the problem. You're going to pour this cold wort into this bucket, and then you're going to add water in here to bring it up to that 5-gallon mark. I do not use nor recommend city water. City water has a lot of chlorine in it. Chlorine is to kill things. Well, you're putting yeast in here, you don't want to kill it. So I recommend like a spring water, going to Walmart and getting a couple jugs of spring water. Yes, ma'am?
What happens if you're on a well, and we've got hardwood, we live outside town, so we're not on city water?
So well water you can use, depending on what's in there. I mean, I would really recommend, if you're really getting in depth with it, having a water quality test done. As long as there's no chlorine in it, you should be good. If there's no chlorine, you're fine. That's what I worry about with city water, is because they pump it full of chlorine. Because they don't want anything to grow in it. Well, you kind of want stuff to grow in it. So I would recommend spring water, well water. Some people even use RO water, reverse osmosis water. That's where it goes through all these different types of filters, and essentially you get the closest thing you can to pure water without anything in it. Some people use that. Yeast needs some minerals, so spring water, it works great. Just something without chlorine in it. So yeah, you've taken your cold wort now, you've put it in this bucket, and you've added enough spring water or whatever water it is you're going to use to bring this up to the 5-gallon mark. Well, now that everything is in here, you need to add your yeast. Once your wort is at temperature, should be around 80 degrees before you add your yeast, you would put that in here. Yeast is going to come in either little packages like that. It's going to come from liquid packages. We sell liquid yeast. It could even come from a previous beer you've made. That yeast in that flask is still yeast. It's good yeast. If you poured that beer out that's in there and left the yeast cells on the bottom and then poured them in here, they're going to ferment. So it can even come from beers that you've previously made. It can even come from beers that you like. So a lot of Colorado breweries are actually the New England breweries right now. Have you ever heard of New England IPA beers? Okay. The haze craze, they call it hazy beer because it's unfiltered. Well, what's to filter out but yeast, right? So this hazy beer has yeast in it. Well, if you like that particular beer, you crack open one of their beers, you'll notice a little sediment at the bottom, the very end of it. That's yeast. You could even pour that yeast in here and it'll ferment. So if you want to scavenge somebody's yeast, for lack of better terms, yeah, you can rob their yeast and then build it up because it's just going to duplicate and duplicate. There are some home brewers that have hundreds of different yeast varieties in their refrigerator or freezer, just because they've banked them, or that's called yeast banking. They've stored them, put them in long-term storage. So now, once we have our wort in here.
But this is yeast when you say banking, that they've like captured from when, like.
Yeah, they've either used, they've either recovered from different beers.
European bakeries used to go with bread, they'd take a fat piece of bread into their next.
Yep.
Dough
Yep.
into their next.
Absolutely.
Same concept.
Some people have even brought home, I know people that have made like Germany trips, the beer motherland, and they've brought beer home from there, and they've built yeast banks up from the beer that you'll get in Germany, yeast, it's a living thing, it's kind of cool. Anyway, yeah, it's yeast that they've stored, they've put in little vials, they've freezed, just for long-term storage. So before we pitch our yeast, we need to know, we kind of want to know how much alcohol this is going to produce, don't we? We want to know when this is all done, do we have a 2% alcohol beer or do we have a 10% alcohol beer? Well, there's no way to know from just pouring stuff together. I mean, you can get a good idea. There's math and there's math programs out there that'll tell you what it should be, or what your gravity should be. But we can actually measure it. And how we would measure it is with a hydrometer and a hydrometer test tube. So I'll pass one of these around too. This is glass. It's guaranteed to drop only once. So what you have.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you'll be the first one. So, what this little hydrometer does is it's calibrated to float at a particular level depending on the density of the liquid it is in. All right, let me explain that. Have you guys been to saltwater, an ocean? Okay. If you've been in the ocean, you'll notice that you are more buoyant. You're going to float easier in the ocean than you would in regular water, in like lake water. Well, why is that? The salt that's in the ocean makes its dense, it increases the density of the liquid. So if there's more particles in that water, you're going to float easier. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So if we know how dense this liquid is, we know potentially how much sugar's in there. In turn, we know how much alcohol we could potentially make. All right? So, little experiment here. This is just regular, plain old Jacksonville city water here. All right? So we are going to put our hydrometer in plain old water. Any guesses on what its density will be?
What's the range?
We have all the way from 1.000, actually, let me take that back, 0.990 to 1.170. So another range is from -5 to 35.
Well, it's 32.
32? Any other guesses?
Depends on the temperature of your water.
That is true. We're not going to get that in depth. Any other guesses?
25.
25? All right.
We just have to think of the lower end of the spectrum.
Fair. Okay. Lower end of the spectrum. Okay. All right. So this hydrometer is calibrated to float at 0 in regular water. The idea behind it is there should be nothing in here to increase this density. This should be just pure water. There's no particles, there's no sugars, there's nothing like that in here. So if you look at that hydrometer, you're going to notice that there's a 0 mark all the way at the top. If you also turn it around a little bit, you're going to see a 4-digit number, and that's 1 point and then 3 different numbers. You see that? Okay. You will hear people refer to a gravity of a beer. What's the gravity of the beer? The gravity is that 4-digit number, that 1.000 number, or 1 point something number. So our gravity of this water should be pure 0, or 1.000. If we put this in here, we may make a little mess, but it's water, it cleans up. Once it's done bouncing, you'll notice it's floating right at just a little above 0. That tells me a couple things. One, there could be stuff in this water to increase its density. 2, my hydrometer could be off a little bit. Or it's sticking to the side of the tube and I'm not getting a true good reading. We're about, yeah. But we're close for our measurements here. So we know that there's no sugar in here. We know there's no alcohol in here. This is at complete 0, right? Okay. So if we take this beer, now remember, I just added the yeast to this yesterday. Should this hydrometer float higher or lower? Should float higher? Right, right. And why is that? Exactly, the density's in it. There's an increased density. So we're going to take this beer. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I'm doing it anyway.
Go for it.
Now, it's a little bubbly because the yeast have been active.
It is.
Yeah. So, again, we may make a little mess. That's the reason I brought a towel. And if anybody wants to smell this beer, you're more than welcome to. It's just yeasty.
And that's just a wheat beer?
Yeah, this is just a wheat beer. Alright. So let's see if it happens. Alright. So we're going to add our hydrometer. Beer is going to come out. And we measure from the water or the liquid line on the actual hydrometer. Everybody see that?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, see how it's sticking up? So, the hydrometer is just an instrument. It's dumb. It's just glass and paper, right? We are the ones that are assuming that the reason it's floating is because there's sugar in there. If I poured this cylinder full of salt or added a bunch of salt to it, it's going to increase its density, right? It's going to float higher, but it doesn't mean there's sugar in there. It doesn't mean it's going to ferment. So we know by what we added into this water and by boiling it and adding our hops, we know that the only thing that could be in here that's increasing its density is sugar, right? So we know what we've started with. And if you notice, this beer should be floating around 1052, which is going to be 1.052 if you look at that hydrometer, which is going to produce about a 6% beer. This is a 6% wheat beer. Where was I going with that?
Is it, you know that because you know the scale of like 1052, or does it say on the?
Yeah, if you look at the hydrometer, there's 3 scales on the actual hydrometer. I should explain that, I apologize. One of them being the gravity scale, which is the 4-digit number I talked about. The other one is being a Brix scale. Brix is usually used in winemaking process. And then the other one is a potential alcohol scale. That's the one that you're kind of going to want to pay attention to as well. Here, I'm going to let these guys see it again so you can follow along with that. The potential alcohol scale tells us that since this is floating at 6%, if the yeast do their job and they eat all the sugar out of here, this hydrometer is going to go lower, right? Because the density has decreased. So we know if we start at this number and we end at this number, doing a little math, we know how much alcohol we made. If we start at 6% potential alcohol, and when we're done fermenting, if it's all the way down to 1% potential alcohol, we know we made 5, right? We also know that if we start at 6 and it goes all the way down to 0, we made 6% alcohol. All of these are factors depending on what yeast you use. If we start with something that's 10% potential alcohol and we add a yeast that we know will die off at 7%, we know we're going to have 3% residual sugar. You're going to have a sweeter beer then. All right? So these semi-sweet wines that you hear about or you may drink, it's residual sugar that didn't get fermented. They used a particular yeast strand that dies at a lower alcohol tolerance and leaves residual sugar. All right? That's why it's important to know what our beginning gravity is, so when we measure our final gravity, or at the very end when it's done fermenting, we know what we can expect. By reading up on our yeast, we'll know this yeast will ferment 8%, let's just say.
So this is done after you cool the.
Yes, you're going to cool the wort and you're going to take a sample.
Okay.
Or you can take a sample, put it in your hydrometer, and then let it cool. Either way.
You don't do it after you've added the water, you just between.
No, after you've added the water up to the 5-gallon mark,
Okay, then, all right.
That's when you take it out.
yeah, then you're going to take a sample. Yeah. And you would use something called a wine thief. Did I bring one? I didn't bring a wine thief with me. Wine thief is just this, it's exactly what it is. You stick it in the bucket, put your thumb over it, you pull it out, and it steals some wine. Turkey baster works the same. Yeah.
Siphon or something?
Yeah. Just remember, anything you use has to be sanitized, right? Because anything you put into that beer has to be sanitary. All right. So we know what this wheat beer is potentially going to make, right? Let's see what our beer that has been fermenting for over a week makes, or where we're at on it. I can tell you what we started at. We'll see what we're at right now, and we'll know how much alcohol is actually in this beer. Make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So let's do this. I love that sound. sorry?
So do you always just fill it up?
Yeah, I like to fill it up to the top because these little bubbles, they can attach to the side of the hydrometer and give you a false reading. If you fill it up to the top, when you stick this in here, all your bubbles go over the edge, they cascade over the sides, and you're left with the liquid right at the top level. You waste a little bit of beer, but it's the process, you know? So, we have this guy. Do him over here. Alright. We started with this guy at 1056. 1056 is going to give us potentially a 7% alcohol. Alright. We have been fermenting for a little over a week. Any idea what we're at? Guesses? Almost 7%. Almost 7%.
Probably at least halfway there, about 5 or something.
Yeah. We'll see where we're at. We should be, with this yeast, we should be very close to being almost done
Okay.
with its primary fermentation. Yeah. All right, so let's see where we're at. Looks like we still got a little ways to go.
It's less than that.
So we are at 1022. So 1.020 is what we're at. Oh crap, I got them all here, don't I? All right. So 1.020 gives us, where's my potential? We are at 1, 2, 3. So yeah, we're about halfway there. Like you said, we started at 7, we got 3, we've done 4, so we've got 3 left. Yeah. All right. So we're going to watch this beer until it gets all the way down to 0. And the reason we're going to watch it till it gets all the way down to 0 is I know what the yeast can consume, I know what sugar we started with, I know what it should be when it's done, all the way down to 0.
So when, like, you got your batch, you just did a second reading, right, or second sample, and do you pour that back in there?
No,
Okay,
no.
if you're-
Yeah, once you take a reading, that's sample beer at that point.
Tasting.
Yeah, it's tasting. It never goes back in the
Okay, I
ferment.
just want to make sure, I didn't think so, but I didn't.
Yeah. So, remember, we are just now talking about the primary fermenter, right?
So how often do you check it?
Once a week.
Okay.
Once a week. So after a week in your primary fermenter, you're going to check to see what the gravity is on it. All right. Depending on the recipe and what the gravity is, will determine when you go to your next step. The next step in the process is moving it from your primary fermenter to your secondary fermenter. The reason we do that is the primary fermentation is when most of the fermentation takes place. That's when the yeast is most active, that's when it's producing the most alcohol, that's also when it's producing the most byproduct and waste. That waste is dead yeast cells that you see on the bottom of the flask that I passed around. Well, when you do a 5-gallon batch, you can have a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of dead yeast on the bottom of this bucket. Dead yeast cells give you bad flavors. You don't want bad flavors in your beer. So after it's done most of its fermentation, you're going to move it from here and into your secondary fermenter. This is when the yeast is not as active, however, they're still consuming some of that sugar. At this point is when the beer is going to start clearing. It's going to start looking more like a golden amber as opposed to a brown. That all takes place in this. We like to use glass because buckets, you're going to have a lot of head space in here. Head space is the gap between the beer level and the top of the lid. which is fine in your primary fermentation, but in your secondary fermentation, you don't want oxygen in here. Oxygen is bad. Oxygen is going to cause oxidation to your beer. It's going to give you off flavors, bad flavors. So you're going to move it to this glass carboy, and that allows you to have less headspace or less risk of oxidation. Make sense? Okay. So after it's in here, that probably wasn't good. So after it's in here, you're going to let it sit, again, depending on the recipe, but for most recipes, it's going to sit in here for a week as well. Sorry. Don't want to make a mess. They won't invite me back.
What do you put, funnel on that, get it out of that 5-gallon bucket into that bottle?
So you can. This is also called a racking cane. This has a little hose that will attach to it. I got it around here, I don't know where. But it'll have a hose attached to it. And what you do is you siphon it off from this bucket to this guy.
And that's included in your kit?
That's included in the kit.
Okay.
It'll siphon from the bucket into here. So after the second week, you're going to again take another hydrometer measurement. You want to see how your beer's coming along, whether it's fermented out completely or not. If it has fermented completely and you're down to 0, whatever you expect for that recipe, now you're going to it's time to bottle. All right. So we have something called a bottling bucket, and these are very, very convenient. Bottling bucket has a little spigot on it. The spigot's going to go right there, and it's going to help you bottle your beer. So, in the meantime though, what you're going to do is you're going to have a little package that looks something like this. And it's corn sugar, all right? Or priming sugar as it's referred to. You're going to mix this corn sugar up with 2 cups of water, and you are going to pour it, or you're going to heat that water up, mix this up with the sugar, and make like a simple syrup. It's just going to be a clear liquid, sugary liquid. You're going to pour that into your bottling bucket. Then you're going to siphon your beer from your glass carboy into this bottling bucket. And you're going to take your little mash paddle and you're going to stir it up a little bit. You just basically want to incorporate all this beer with that sugar. Now that seems a little odd that we just added sugar after we just fermented. I get it, I understand. But what does yeast produce? The 2 things that yeast produce.
Alcohol.
Alcohol is one, right?
That's an important one.
That's a very important one. There's also another very important one.
Sugar.
CO2.
CO2,
Right.
exactly. Produces CO2. What do we like our beer to have? Bubbles to it, right? Right. So we just took this beer that is clear and we have introduced it to a sugary liquid, right? Well, now it's going to kick off fermentation again, right? If we left it in here, it's going to continue to ferment. Well, what if it fermented in our bottle, right? If it continued to ferment in our bottle,
We'd have explosive bottles.
well, but we could. If we added way too much sugar, we're going to have explosive bottles. But if we added the right amount of sugar to this beer and it fermented in our bottle a little bit, it's going to produce CO2 and make it bubbly, right? It's a way of carbonating your beer inside the bottle. It's called bottle conditioning, is what it's also referred to as. So we now have our sugar water in here. We have our beer that's gone through the primary fermentation, the secondary fermentation. We've moved it into our bottling bucket. We're then going to take our clean and sanitized bottles, right? Because everything has to be clean and sanitized. we're gonna take our little bottling spigot that's gonna be attached to this bucket, and we are gonna fill our bottles up, our beer bottles up. We're just gonna open this up, we're gonna fill to the top, shut it off, and then we're gonna cap them. Our kit even comes with a little bottle capper. Put your bottle cap right there, it's magnetic, it holds it. Put that on top of the bottle, put both levers down, you cap your beer. So now this yeasty liquid that has some sugar in it is going to start fermenting, or not fermenting, yeah, it's going to start fermenting a little bit more inside this bottle. Produces just a little bit more alcohol, but the main thing it produces is a CO2, the carbonation that we want.
How full do you fill your bottles?
I usually fill mine about an inch away from the top of the neck. Our kit also includes, let me find it, there it is. So, we have something called a bottling wand. And this little bottling wand is very, very convenient. You're going to hook the siphon hose that's included. You're going to put your bucket on the table. You're going to have this hooked up. You're going to hook your siphon hose up to this guy. And then the siphon hose is going to go to your bottling wand. You're then going to sit on the floor, or depending, wherever you want. You're going to put this bottling wand in the bottom of the bottle. You're going to press it down, and it's going to fill the bottle. When you pull this out, or you're going to fill it all the way to the neck, like I did here. When you pull this wand out, you're at the perfect amount of headspace.
Okay.
It's almost like we've thought of everything.
Nice.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, we make it easy. So at that point, you're going to let your beer sit for another 2 weeks in these bottles. After 2 weeks, cold one down, or chill one down, and you've got your own cold beer that you've made.
So just 2 weeks, room temperature,
Yep.
basically, okay.
Simply, you got beer.
So the total process around a month.
Around a month. Yeah. We say from grain to glass, 1 month. Yeah. And it's really not that hard. I mean, the hardest thing was heating up the water and
And knowing what to do and when.
yeah, that's another very big key, is knowing what to do and when, and how to use some of this equipment. It can be very intimidating if you open up this box and you're like, oh shit, I got this bucket with a hole and that bucket doesn't have one. What am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
You know.
We need step one.
Exactly. So we knowing what all this stuff does and how it works and why you do it, I think is very important. Now-
Does any time during the fermentation process at any of them, does it matter like how much light is in the room or?
Yes. You do not want your beer exposed to light. You ideally want your beer in a steady temperature environment. So I would not put it in the garage in October, because it's going to get hot during the day, cold at night. I would put it like in a closet, a basement, a spare bathroom is good. Spare bathroom is great, like a bathtub, for your first batch, because sometimes it can get messy. Sometimes it can get a little messy, and a bathtub is pretty easy to clean up. I wouldn't put it in your closet with your old wedding gown or anything like that, because you probably won't make beer a second time.
And if you do, you'll be a bachelor.
Yeah.
No need for
But you'll have good beer.
But you'll have good beer.
It's one trade-off.
Or beer too.
Yeah, but somewhere in a temperature steady, low light source environment. These glass carboys, they let light in. I mean, that's unfortunate. What I did at home when I had to brew when we didn't have a basement, I took one of my kids' old T-shirts and went right over it. and kept the light out. So I mean, that's one way of doing it. You can be as creative as you want, you know, but some way to keep the light source out. That's why beer bottles are brown.
Most of them?
Yep, most of them, it keeps most of the light out. Now, we sell new beer bottles. We sell brand new bottles that you can use. I don't sell too many of them because most people like to collect their own, so to speak, you know. They've bought a case of beer that are refillable bottles or recappable bottles, so they just save those. You cannot cap a twist-off bottle very easily. I would not recommend those being the ones that you save. You want something that is that's a pry-off. You know, your most of your craft beers have pry-offs. Yeah, where your commercial beers are twist-off caps. So that is the extract process. There's also all grain, or there's partial grain mashes as well. Partial grain mashes is where you're going to use, it's just that. It's going to be partial extract and part grain. All right. This grain is going to go into a little bag, and you're going to let it steep in here like a tea bag. All right. That's partial grain. You can then go to brew in the bag. That's like your next step. That's where you take this big nylon bag, and it's going to open up somewhere. Yeah, there it is. Now, yeah. It's just that easy. You're going to put this nylon bag around your pot. You're going to put your grains in here. You're going to let them steep in there for a little bit, like a big tea bag. And then you're going to take the nylon bag, pull it out, let all the water drip out, and now you have wort in here. All right. So that is brew in the bag. And then the next step up would be an all grain. That's where you have multiple vessels, a hot liquor tank, a mash tun, a boil kettle, and it becomes more of an involved process. The simplest way is extract or brew in the bag to get started, or partial grains. I like to steer people towards extract for the first time. If you can boil water, you can make beer. Questions? I know you got some.
Now, when you do yours,
Yes?
do you use the grains or do you use the extract? Or?
I have done all of them. I've done all the above. At this point, I have a commercial brewery. Yeah, I'm not brewing professionally yet, but I have a commercial scale equipment.
Well, we were in your place a week ago.
Oh,
Blake.
Blake.
yeah, my kid Blake.
Uh-huh.
Did he help you out?
Excellent.
Good,
Excellent.
good.
You did good with that.
Yeah.
But
One of them we got right.
Your honey drop was awesome.
Oh, the lemon drop one? You like that?
It was
Yeah.
good. It was good.
Thank you.
It was good. It's, you walk into that place, it smells wonderful.
Doesn't it? It really does. Yeah. So you saw then my brew setup.
Yes.
Then if you were there last
Yes.
weekend, you saw the brew
Said you
setup.
just got it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's nice.
Yeah, it's a 3-kettle Herms system. Herms is heat exchange recirculating mash. I have a couple pumps. There's never heat under the grain because that could scorch the grain, give it all flavors. It's quite a process. And then my fermenters are 15-gallon stainless steel conical fermenters that are glycol chilled, so I can temperature control them. I can lager in them.
Right.
I can do all those things that home brewers can't. But we've waited a long time to get that. And
Well, now, he did tell us that as we moved along the chain, so to speak, that we might consider going to kegging rather than bottling
Absolutely.
later, and I
Absolutely.
can see that process, but right now we have to start small.
Absolutely.
Okay. On your bottles, to
Yes, ma'am.
sanitize them,
Yes, ma'am.
can you put them in a dishwasher? I mean, will that be enough to start with, or do you need more than that?
No, that is not enough to start with. So,
Okay.
bottles you can put in your dishwasher if you have a powerful enough dishwasher
Okay.
to clean them.
Okay,
I would not recommend using any detergents because it will cause a white film on the bottle. We have a specific detergent that we would recommend. It's more of a caustic material, and you don't want to put that in your dishwasher. That's why kegging is so nice for people to go to, because you get tired of washing 53
Right.
bottles at a time. I guarantee you do.
yeah.
So we recommend a particular wash. It's called powder brewery wash.
Okay.
Works great for cleaning the bottles. And then you would also need to use some sort of chemical to sanitize them, whether that be iodine or the Star San. We recommend people using Star San, just because it's a lot easier and you don't stain. The only downside to Star San is, and the ladies pay particular attention to this, if you have some jewelry that your man said this is gold, or this is sterling silver, and you trust them, that's great. If you have any doubts, I would say take it off, because anything that is plated, that acid will eat through and show as bare metal. It's fine for your hands. I mean, really, it doesn't hurt or anything like that. It may dry your hands up a little bit, but if you leave jewelry in it for long term, it'll take the plating right off. Yes, ma'am.
Now, what happens is, I live out in the country, I'm on a septic system.
Uh-huh.
If you run the water and stuff out of the cleaning into that septic system, is that a fluoride in?
I don't know the answer to that. I would like to say it's probably not the best. So I would probably dump your water
Outside.
Yeah, outside along a ditch or something. It's a very light acid.
Neighbor's
But-
ditch.
Yeah, but I don't know how that would affect the balance of a septic system. That, I honestly don't know.
It won't eat through plastic pipes, right?
No, will not, because we sanitize our buckets.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not, once it goes into the lines, it's diluted with water. You know, what I'm talking about is when you put your hands in there, and for long term, it may start to take the plating off after numerous exposures. So, but that's a very good question. I hadn't thought about the septic systems yet.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I need to look into that a little bit more.
So what would her concern, what's the main ingredient in that? Is it, you said acid?
It's a phosphoric acid.
Because you add, what's that stuff, the enzymes you add to the septic system?
Oh,
That might combat it.
So if you're worried about Star San, you can also use citric acid. Citric acid is basically the acid that's in lemons, citrus acid. But it does the same thing. It decreases the pH to the point where nothing can live in it. We sell bags of citric acid as well. Another use for the citric acid, those bath bombs, you've probably seen all over Etsy, I know my wife has, all these bath bombs, they have citric acid in them. But that'll work as a sanitizer as well. So if you're concerned about Star San, and you don't want to use iodine, because you don't want arms to be orange, you can use citric acid as well.
I'm just thinking about how much it would take for 50-some bottles to sanitize those, that's,
So we mix up a 5-gallon batch at a time,
okay,
and it takes 1 ounce of our Star San to 5 gallons of water
okay,
to make a correct dilution.
okay.
and that star sand will last a while. It comes in you can get it in either a 4 ounce, 8 ounce, 16 ounce, or 32 ounce. So you either have 4 doses, 8 doses, 16 doses, or 32.
Okay, but you're gonna need that to sanitize all your stuff
You
there too.
would need that as
so-
well. You would need that as well. However, it comes with iodine if you want to use the iodine. And this is what, a 4 ounce bottle? So this is 4 uses as well. It's 1 ounce per 5 gallons of water.
Have you ever heard of ever using like an ultraviolet?
UV sterilizers. I have not run into too many people that do.
I just know they use it for like the city water and stuff like that.
Sure, sure. I have not run into too many.
I didn't know if-
None of the breweries that I've been involved with have used those.
Used it.
Yeah. Every brewery I've been involved with uses iodine and hot water for sanitization and for cleaning. It's a caustic material like PVW and hot water. Hot water is your friend at a brewery. We go through a lot of hot water. We actually have a pretty big on-demand hot water heater just to keep up with our hot water needs. Yes, sir.
If I might, if nobody minds, jump away from the technical side
Yes.
of this. What particularly types of beers / ales can you home brew?
Anything.
Anything.
Anything. I have some friends that do, they just brought me in a Mexican lager beer. They got a particular yeast strain and made a Mexican lager. I have some friends that do Belgian quads, which are really, really strong. I have a friend that does a open air fermentation in October. He mixes up his beer. He takes the bucket outside, lid off.
Well, that's a set.
Yeah, whatever floats in at night is what ferments his beer, and he closes it up. And what's sad is he's actually made some pretty decent beer off of that. Some of your Belgian lambics, they are made in the same 200-year-old building, and they're on what's called not a ship table. Ship tank. I can't think of. Have you guys seen the cheese making process? Like a cheese making process? You know how they put all the milk in this big steam table?
Yeah.
They have something very similar to that over in at these different breweries in Belgium, where they take the beer after it's been brewed and they put it on this big this big stainless steel table, and then they just let whatever falls in there ferment the beer. And these breweries are pretty much locked into always being at that brewery, because if they moved to a new place, they wouldn't taste the same, because the yeast that's in the wood right above them, is what trickles down and ferments these beers. So they've been in the same brewery for hundreds and hundreds of years because it just wouldn't taste the same.
Well, the reason I was asking was, I honestly probably will just continue to consume it and let somebody else brew it.
Sure. So the
But
most
I like IPAs, and I like classic English bitters,
okay,
and then I like imperial stouts,
okay,
and then I like just pretty much any beer
sure,
or ale.
yeah,
But those three are probably high on my list. I mean, if you were going to, my go-to is probably
Right.
an IPA, then the bitters, and then the imperial stouts.
So the most common beer that's homebrewed is an ale, of course,
Yeah.
because ales are not too temperature requirement. I mean, they don't require too much of a temperature variance. It's something that is normal temperatures that everybody has in their house, 60 to 70 degrees. And it's just the most common type of yeast available. Lagers, they require temperature control. You have to be in the 30, they have to be able to get down into the 30s to do a lagering. That's cold fermentation. It's where the yeast are able to ferment in colder temperatures. So if you've been to the Budweiser tour and you've gone into their fermentation tanks, their fermentation rooms, it's probably cold in there because they're a lager and they do cold fermentation.
What's the easiest beer for a first timer to make?
An ale.
Ale hands down.
And an ale, hands down. It's not too hoppy. It's something that is pretty much easy to drink. Not a huge flavor component to it. I mean, it's going to taste like a beer, but you're not going to have an overwhelming smell or overwhelming bitterness to it. It's just an easy beer to make.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Now Blake told us that you could add flavorings sometime. to it.
Absolutely.
Now, what process, when do you do that?
So,
In this process, where do
yeah,
you dump it in?
there's many different flavor alternatives.
Okay.
There's flavoring sugars. So there's some sugars that you can add in here
Okay.
that'll add a flavor. It's like a Belgian candy syrup is what it's called.
Okay.
Those can be added at any one of these stages.
Okay.
Most common is at late this stage or bottling stage. The extract flavorings are added late this stage. Yeah, you can add them at any time.
Okay.
The sugars, the flavored sugars are usually added later because if it ferments out in the primary, you don't get a lot of the flavor. The flavors don't stick around, but they're not that strong.
Okay, would it take the place of your
It very well could take the place of that
sugar at the
priming
end?
sugar.
Okay.
You are one smart gal.
No, I just
That's why I
like.
married her.
Yeah, I see why. No, honestly, that actually is a very common procedure. Is
Okay.
to take place. They use a Belgian candy sugar that has flavoring in it, substitution of the priming sugar. Yeah,
So not along with, but substitute.
yes, substitution. Yeah, substitution of. Yeah. Yeah. Clear as mud.
No, yeah, no, I.
Yeah.
You put blueberries in beer.
Yes. Yep. I'm actually doing, or this wheat beer that I'm making, is actually going to be. I'm going to add peaches to it at the very end, because Calhoun County peaches are in season right now. They're cheap. They're not cheap, but I mean they're easy to get. Yeah, they're fresh.
Okay, so how are you gonna add that?
So I'm going to add it at late this stage.
Or
Okay,
do you use like a mash? Is that what you do? You just boil it down and get the juice out of it?
Yeah, no, you don't want to boil it. And you don't want to boil it because you're going to boil off a lot of those flavors. You're going to cook off a lot of those flavors. How I'm going to do it is I'm going to take these peaches and I'm going to freeze them. All right. Reason I'm going to freeze them, it breaks the cell walls of all that fruit. Once you break the cell walls, it makes
so release it.
it makes the yeast. It's easier for the yeast to consume the sugar in there. So I'm going to freeze it, and the other reason I'm going to freeze it is it's easier to cut the skins off of a frozen fruit than it is something that's soft.
So how are you gonna introduce it into the
So
carbonate?
after I peel them all, I am then going to cut them, remove the pits, and I'm going to puree them. Put them in my blender, I'm going to puree them. I'm then going to put a little bit of sodium metabisulfate. It is a chemical that will kill any wild yeast. I'm going to add that to that puree, let it sit for 12 to 24 hours, and then I'm going to pour that puree in there. That sodium metabisulfate is going to sanitize that fruit. So nothing wild is in there. And then when I add it, I know that just my yeast is going to consume it.
Okay,
Yeah,
real straight in.
yeah. That's how I'm gonna try it. I've never done a peach beer. I've never done it. So we're gonna take a swag at it and see what happens.
Have you ever heard of maybe put jalapeno peppers in beer?
Absolutely.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yep.
I bet
Yep.
that'd be good.
So the homebrew club that I'm a member of, Prairie Schooners, I recommend you all to come over to it if you would like. Prairie Schooners, we meet once a month at High V, 7 o'clock in the liquor tasting room, the second Wednesday of every month. Prairie Schooners is a homebrew club that's basically we are there to encourage home brewers, home brewers in the beer making process, and we've actually gotten a few people that have been in the club have actually opened up their own breweries.
The second Wednesday at Hy-Vee at 7 o'clock, right?
That's correct, in the liquor tasting room. So this Wednesday actually at 7 o'clock. Buzz Bomb Brewing, they opened up because they were home brewers and they went to the club. 1905 in Assumption, home brewers that were in the club that opened up their own brewery. Home brewer in the club that opened up my own beer store. So there's a lot of knowledge in there, and we encourage novice people all the way up to professionals to come to the club. But where I was going with that is once a year we have a vegetable beer competition where you have to make a beer out of vegetables. And we've had a lot of jalapeno beers because there's only so much you can make with a vegetable. You either get a tomato-based beer somehow, or you get a jalapeno beer. We had one guy make a carrot cake beer. He used carrot cake.
Oh my.
He took carrots. He pureed some carrots up. It was involved in a mash. Used a vanilla extract, added that flavoring to it, and got that vanilla carrot. It was pretty decent. And he actually won second place.
You
So.
want his name and number,
I
right?
think it was this spring or late winter, Stone Brewing out of California released an asparagus IPA.
Really?
And I thought, no,
Yeah.
can't do that.
There's some strange.
Green beans being out.
It was, and they even leave the asparagus in the bottom, I mean, the matter.
If it's got sugars in it, it'll
Oh, I tried
ferment.
it.
Sounds good.
I
Yeah.
try it.
I'm glad you think so. I just,
Pumpkin.
no.
So we have a Belgian candy syrup that actually is pumpkin spice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, in your fall, a lot of
Yeah. So you could make like a dark porter, maybe with some pumpkin spice in it.
I like the porters.
Yeah.
No, cherries,
Chocolate vanilla.
See?
cherries.
Yeah, make them both. Have your little own home competition.
Yeah,
First batch.
yeah, we better do our first batch.
All right, yeah, baby steps,
Let's
right?
try that, baby steps.
Any other questions?
That's the beauty of it, you can make anything you want.
Yeah,
Or at least give it a shot.
you can give it a shot.
Exactly.
So I know the library here has actually taken upon themselves to get a lot of books in on the home brewing process, which I think is wonderful. They've gotten John Palmer, How to Brew. He is the go-to guy for learning how to brew. They have his book. They actually have the very new book, or the newest version of that book. They also have the Brewmaster's Bible put out by the American Homebrew Association. Another good, very good reference book. At Capital City, we decided that we wanted to donate a book as well. We were going to donate the John Palmer How to Brew, but then we realized that you guys already got it. So we decided that somebody in the class here should probably win it. So you guys all signed up when you came in, and I believe a drawing has already taken place, Chris?
Yes, the winner is Emily.
Sweet.
Yeah, you got your very own copy of John Palmer How to Brew. He,
Have to look it up.
yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge in that book. If it's in there, I absolutely trust it. If I have a question, that's the book I refer to. Yeah, that's my go-to book. That and the Brewmaster's Bible, they're both very good. But I'd look at John before I looked at the Brewmaster. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
So you got a book of recipes up there at your place you can
Yes.
buy, so you can.
Yep. We have stacks and piles of recipes. Or
Blake printed us off a recipe.
did he? Which one did he print you?
Your, the wheat,
It's a wheat beer,
Okay.
it's one of the
and
wheat.
it had all the, what kind of hops and everything we need to
He
do.
fixes it.
It's just that we didn't know, there was no step-by-step, like, okay, you need to do this, and then you add it here. And we're so new, it's like, okay,
So this has been very helpful.
Okay,
Where do those steps go?
sure,
Where
sure.
do we add things?
By all means, call us, we'll walk you.
That's what he said, he was very, very.
No, no, I mean, that
Excellent.
we have a phone just for that reason. Facebook us. Are you on Facebook?
We're old,
Well,
It's
So
hard to
am
get
I.
on it.
we don't wanna do that.
all right, no
There's
worries.
Too much bad things there.
So if you're on Facebook and you want to message us, by all means, message us. Either myself or my son will respond to you, you know, whenever we get the opportunity, but we're usually within a couple hours of responding. Call us at the store if you have questions during your brew day, or you're just stuck, or hey Slim, the reading is this, it says it should be this, it hasn't moved in a couple days, what should I do? You know, just we're here to answer questions. We want you to be successful in your home brew because we want you to do it again, obviously. If somebody, it's not a good business if nobody does it a second time.
And you have something in the fall, is it fall?
Yeah, so we have Learn to Homebrew Day in the fall. It's going to be November, it's the first Saturday in November, I believe.
First Saturday?
Yeah, it's going to be at our shop. It's called Learn to Brew Day. We will have demonstrations of probably all 4 of these examples.
Okay.
At what time?
We usually start at, I think, 10 a.m. is when we usually start brewing, and we're done usually around 4. Yeah. And then a lot of home brewers show up there, and they bring different beers that they've made, and there's always samples to be had.
Saturday, November, right?
A lot of samples to be had.
Sounds like a good day to me.
It is a very good day. Yeah. I'm glad Blake set you up.
Oh, he was excellent.
He is a good
He
kid.
took time, he took time with
We were
us.
very
Good.
impressed, very pleased.
No.
He's a good kid. He's a very good kid.
Yep, I have to say yes.
You have to keep him around now.
He was probably planning on firing him, but now
Was he?
Yeah, yeah. Up until this, I mean, he was.
Now you got
Anybody
me.
that offers